Thank you for being here. We do have visitors because of the summer holiday season. And as already been mentioned, we have several who are away. I always pray for safe travel for those, and I hope you will remember that. We have been in circumstances as a family when our travel turned out to be a little bit of an adventure. And we have always appreciated prayers for those who are traveling, that you would make it all the way there and all the way back. And we ask that you be very specific, that there's a family story associated with that. We are studying Heaven in the Home this last several weeks. I want us to talk about a most important subject. It's a subject that has to be discussed when you come to a study like the home. The lesson is entitled The Biblical Model for Love. We're going to look at the 4 uses of the word love in our vernacular. We're going to try to apply it, make some points as it speaks to our actions in our home, and hopefully be the people that we ought to be to each other as it relates to agape, the love of the Bible. 4 words are used generally to give us a meaning of the word love in a generic sense. The first one is storge, and it speaks of family love. It's the love of parents for children. It's the love of children for parents, brothers and sisters for each other. And the way storge is lived out, if you will, as it points to marriage, and we're trying to relate it to that as we go through the lesson. Storge means that my family is important to me. And it means that I want my family to be important to you. I recognize that your family is important to you, and your family will also be important to me. And it's an amazing thing when 2 families are brought together because of a marriage of 2 individuals. When you do marriage counseling, you encourage both of the people involved to look at the family of the person you're going to marry. Notice how they treat each other. Notice the things they do, the choices they make. Notice how they celebrate certain big events, and acknowledge that their family may do it different than yours, and they're going to come into that relationship wanting to follow their family's traditions. And you're going to need to realize that they also have traditions, and there will be changes that might be necessary on your part. Your family, both families are important to both of us. And coming into a relationship with that understanding is very, very, very important. For Keenan Faulkner in their marriage Richmond seminar years ago, and now it's on DVD because they've retired that seminar. They talk about a husband and a wife getting married, and they wake up the morning after their honeymoon, and they're both sitting there wide awake, just waiting for something to happen. Finally, one of them kind of and the other realizes they're expecting something. Well, so am I, they're thinking. In one family, the man gets up early and starts the coffee. In the other family, it's the woman's duty. A simple thing, but it's the tradition that you were raised under, and the expectation when a husband and wife from 2 individual families come and form a new tradition. Now, what's interesting, Paul or Carl never would tell us which one got up first, and that may have been another whole discussion of how you settle conflicts in one family compared to another. But storge love says something about my family and the other family, and it's important in the relationship. The other one is eros. It's a sensual love. It means a love that is egocentric. It's wanting to have, in the very strictest sense. It's seeking union with the object of its desire. And of course, the value that evokes that is found in the thing loved. Eros is not discussed in the Bible. Agape is, but this eros is not discussed in the Bible. And yet it relates to the family and to marriage, if you will. It means that I am physically attracted to you. And that many times is associated with that chemistry that brings a boy and a girl, a man and a woman together. There's a physical, chemical reaction, if you will, when you find that right person and that physical attractiveness. And I've made the mistake in times past as a young person to suggest that men are visually attracted to a woman, and in counseling and in teen classes, the young girls need to realize that. The men are visually attracted to the picture that you're giving them by your dress. And yet others tell me, well, so are the girls. The girls are physically attracted too. Maybe it's a little different, but I'm physically attracted to you. And of course we think of eros as sex, leading to sexual intercourse and all the ramifications of it. But that's a part of that word, and it's certainly a part of this biblical model. The third one is phileo. It's friendship, love given to all kinds of human beings. It's shown in such terms as Philadelphia, brotherly love. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania is known as the city of brotherly love. It's mentioned in history books. It's a great point that they lift up to others, and phileo certainly comes from that. But phileo is also involved in marriage. It means that I like you. It means that I enjoy being with you. It means I enjoy going places with you. And it means I enjoy experiencing things with you. And that's why in the dating relationship, that love, if you will, begins. Spending time with a person, spending hours with a person, spending many weeks and months and sometimes years with people. And you can't wait to be together. And you just remember that special time when you're apart. And if that separation is over a period of time because of studies or some opportunity of employment, and there's a separation, if you will, you miss that person. Not just for those other attributes that we've already discussed, but you miss being with that person. You miss talking with that person. Now in marriage for counseling, it comes up from time to time. Because some of us who are introverts, when we're dating, just talk as men. And for some reason, when we get married, you can't get a word out of us. We become very quiet. And they were attracted to that person who would share himself with her, share his experiences, share his feelings. And that's a word many men do not like. Share those things, and then you come home and suddenly, that first week of marriage, you can't get a word out of him. And it's a hardship, and it has to change. The things that draw us together need to continue in that marriage relationship. And certainly this concept of phileo means that I enjoy being with you and going places with you and experiencing things with you. And then the fourth one, it's the love of the Bible, if you will. It's God's love. It's agape. And it certainly is talked about often as you would come and look at the Bible. It's a spontaneous impulse of the heart to desire that which is good for the one loved. And it will be at any cost. There are no prerequisites, no conditions, no requirements. And it's exciting for us to realize agape is the love of God. And agape, as it's spelled out in 1 Corinthians 13, we'll read the verses in a moment, well known to most of us, memorized at some point by all of us. But agape is the acting out of God's will toward another individual. We're treating people the way God would treat them. Agape is the highest of loves. And there's no prerequisite. We'll talk about unconditional in a moment. There's no condition. There's no requirement. God just loves us. John talks in his epistle, God is love. That's his nature. He cannot be unloving. God is love. God equals love. Those who teach Greek suggest. And there are other phrases used to describe God. God is a consuming power. But the result of consuming fire, but the reality is love is something that has no prerequisite, condition, or requirement. And so in marriage, agape is seen this way. It says, I will be good to you. I will treat you with patience and kindness. I'll treat you with courtesy. I'll treat you with consideration. I'll treat you with deep concern. And that's an unconditional promise that I make to you. I will always, under all circumstances, treat you that way. Now, love, agape, it's an action based upon the will. I will treat you this way. It's a decision that I've made. It won't wait for you to do something for me to then give it or act it out. It'll not depend upon whether this was a good week or a good month or a good day. I will treat you this way no matter what. And it's a agape love, as we double the word, but we use it so as to explain. Agape is that action that is a matter of the will. And we make a decision and we act upon that decision. Now, as we talked about in the class this morning, we're moving in those directions. We're making progress in that direction. We will never reach perfection in that area, but we need to be striving for it. We need to be acting in that way toward those in our environment. And there are times when we don't have a phileo love. We don't necessarily like someone. There's something about them. There's something about their characteristics. There's something about the things that we don't have in common. It's possible, but agape is always there. Always willing to do what's best for them, no matter what. And it's the love that we hope to be building in congregations, in families certainly, and then, of course, as we apply it to life. Agape is self-giving love. It's gift love, one writer said. It's the love that goes on loving even when the other becomes unlovable. Now look at yourself in the mirror from time to time. Have you ever seen that person? You just acted so unlovable today. You went somewhere with your family and you just were unlovable. But agape says, I love you anyway. And it's not because of family ties. It's because it's the love of the will. It's a decision I made way back then. And of course at the marriage altar, but probably well before that. And agape love is not just something that happens to you. You know, that speaks more to eros. It speaks more to other chemistry, if you will, in a dating relationship perhaps. Agape is not something that just happens to you. It is something you make happen. And that's why it's so important. It's a love of it is a personal act of commitment. It's the love of Christ, the love of God. And certainly that's why it's that gift love that we give to another. And Christ's love for us is a sacrificial love. Christ's love for us is unconditional. Christ's love for us is eternal. So we begin to realize the importance of agape. We realize the importance of striving in that direction. But let me make a point again with a few more points because it's so important. There are times in marriage and in marriage counseling when this finger is used. And they're sitting there in front of you, and they're pointing, well, he did this, he said that, he didn't do this, you should have seen that. And it's not a pleasant circumstance for the one to whom the finger is pointed, and it's not very pleasant for the one who thought that couple understood agape. You thought they understood the conditions of that marriage acted out, or agape acted out in marriage. Let me read for emphasis what will take away that finger of pointing to the other person as if I'm in the clear. It's all his, her fault. Well, agape means there are no conditions necessary. You don't have to earn agape. You do not have to desire it. You don't have to measure up to any standard to get me to love you in that way. You don't have to work for my agape love. You don't even have to appreciate it. What? I lose all excuse? Suddenly I'm accountable? Suddenly I must take upon a responsibility? That's the whole point when you're involved in marriage counseling. And I was at a circumstance many years ago now, working with college students. Ray did a devotional that I've always remembered, and it comes up when thinking of this discussion. He did a devotional for the students there, and he talked about how sometimes we point our finger to other people, and he turned his hand around and says, and there's 3 fingers pointing at us. And it was a point well received. I'm hoping the 80 or 90 people there that night who heard it remembered it. 1 finger pointed to someone else in blame, but 3 pointed to me in responsibility and accountability. Now, I took it a point later when we talk later. Notice how I point. I tend to point like this. 1 to the other person, 3 to me, and 1 to God. And ultimately it comes to this. 4 to me and 1 to God. And ultimately it turns to this, where we turn to God with what we would say in clinical terminology, with an empty hand. Return to God with an empty hand. But that's part of agape. And accepting responsibility, accepting accountability. Agape is not a feeling. It's an act of the will. Agape is a commitment to act in the best interest of another without any conditions and without her or his need being there. It's an unconditional commitment to an imperfect person. And that's when it really speaks to each of us. My agape is an act of my will wanting to act out God's love towards you, and it's being acted out admittedly to you, an imperfect person. But that's not something we should say, but it's something we should realize in a relationship circumstance. Because remember, they will always be imperfect. And by the way, look in the mirror. Look in the mirror. And if you're wondering, open it up for discussion. Open it up for discussion from that imperfect person, and let them maybe share in a nice way, in a non-confrontational way, some of your imperfections that they overlook as they extend to you agape. It's an interesting process. It's a very revealing process. It should be a very educational and healing process as well. You kind of see yourself, and you've wanted to ignore that. It's, again, like Gary was saying Wednesday night, for those not there, the person with the beam in his eye finding the speck in the other. That's the way this sometimes reveals itself when you want to talk about their imperfections, but don't dare look at me. But they need you to see that so you'll understand the dilemma that brought you to this marriage counseling circumstance to begin with. But that's how it lives itself out. Let me read you something, guys, that's difficult to hear. I'm not suggesting it has to be this way, but it certainly could be this way. In a good marriage, phileo, the husband and wife are also friends. Phileo's companionship is many things: being reasonably happy to go shopping with her. Watching TV together, even the girl flicks, and munching popcorn together. Feeling lonely when he or she's out of town. Friendship means communication. Phileo communication is many things. Sharing something you read in a book or magazine. Reminiscing how you had to catch all the mice and remove all the bats before you could move into your apartment. And there's a reality there that's not accidental. Eating breakfast together without the morning paper. We don't even have newspapers in our society anymore. So lay your iPad down. Catch up on the news a little bit later, perhaps. Agreeing on the design of the new wallpaper on the room. Having the courage to tell the other that maybe what you're putting on isn't the best choice today. Phileo is also cooperation. While eros is almost always face-to-face relationship, phileo is very often a shoulder-to-shoulder relationship. Where there's phileo, husband and wife are working together on something greater than both of them. They're finding their oneness not directly in each other, but in their interest in the common cause. In eros, each seeks fulfillment in the other. Phileo, they seek fulfillment in one mutual goal. And of course, we talked about last week for those here, presumed love and assumed love. It's very, very different what you expect. If you're the dictator and the boss, and there's not an openness to ideas, you never want to receive them, and you certainly never ask for it. And yet the other side by side. Can we work on this together? Do you have your ideas? Let's think about them. Let's pray about them. It's very different in phileo, certainly, as a side-by-side action. Married love, married agape, you have said to one another, I will. And with those words, you've declared your voluntary assent and turned a crucial point in your lives. You know full well all the doubts and suspicions with which a lifelong partnership between two persons is faced. It is you as a married couple who must bear the whole responsibility for the success of your married life with all the happiness it will bring. It is not your love which sustains the marriage. From now, the marriage sustains your love. I will give to you a love that is patient, a love that is kind, a love that endures. I will pledge to you a love that is not jealous or possessive, a love that is not proud or selfish, a love that is not rude or inconsiderate. Our love will know no limits to its endurance, no end to its trust, no fading of its hope. It will outlast everything. Our love will stand when all else has fallen. Our life together will have three great qualities: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest is love. And if you listened even half of the time, you saw that paragraph describing 1 Corinthians 13 and the descriptions of agape there by Paul. In China, we used every opportunity in the classroom. Kira and I had about 1,300 students in those 2 years to use the phrase American culture. If we said American culture, we can say anything we wanted as it related to God, Bible, Christ, whatever it was. But we found out very quickly that when we would talk about love, since 98% of our students were young ladies, they really listened. And their hearts went aflutter. And their minds took it in. And when they would do their 3 or 4 minute speeches at midterm and their 5 to 7 minute speech at the final teaching oral English, in my classes at least, because I would bring these things up somewhat like I have today, they would always quote from 1 Corinthians 13. And because they had it so clear in their presentation, they had found it somewhere. on the internet. Some of them had Bibles because we gave them to them. But they always came back to these verses. Even in a country where many do not believe in God, they want agape love. They want this in their life if they spend a life with someone for the rest of their life. It's not unusual, is it? It's not unusual. It's what we all want. And many ministers will put these words, these principles, into a marriage ceremony because it's that which sustains that marriage, no matter what the circumstances, especially through the harder times. A couple of points before we close. Why is it, with these well-known principles and accepted definitions of 4 areas of love, why is it that our families are in such difficult circumstances? First and foremost, I think, is because sometimes there's just not a commitment that there ought to be. There's a lack of commitment. When reference is made to an individual's commitment to marriage, what is being described to is the degree to which that person is willing to compromise. It speaks of self-interest. It speaks of personal ideals of perfection, indulgences in taste, and so forth, so that a particular relationship can continue. The alternative to making that commitment is not having a relationship, one that remains very long. And that comes from William Ledner from The Mirages of Marriage. A lack of commitment. I approach it this way. I find myself repeating this very often in many circumstances. Can you do this for one day? You've heard this before, haven't you? Can you be faithful to God for one day? Can you resist that sin, that temptation that's leading you to sin for one day? And they say it's hard. Can you do it for half a day? Break it down into smaller increments of time. Can you commit to this most important thing for one day? And that's all we're ever asked to do. Wait a minute, what? Yes, I marry someone for eternity, but God only gives us one day at a time. Can you do it for one day? Can you love unconditionally for one day? Can you be a friend for one day? Can you be attracted to another and yet have her interest when sex is in the picture? Can you look at it from her perspective if you've not been the friend and you haven't displayed agape all day and yet you're wanting something special at the end of the day? Can you do it for one day? And the reality is it makes it more practical and possible. And that's not breaking the principle of Scripture. God gives us one day at a time. And most of us would say that, and we can do anything for one day. We can withstand anything for one day, but that's not a healthy attitude to display towards your spouse. But that principle of life, that principle of difficulty of what there is in the midst of your life. Too much attention to the urgent is on the list. A decentralization. The reality is that many times we delegate the responsibilities of family, children to other people. We want the church to take care of my teenager when I haven't done much in that regard. We want the church, the school to educate our children in all matters. We turn them over to someone else. That's hurting our families when we have that idea. And certainly, sometimes our expectations are just too high. They can't be matched. And we'll always look at it as a failure. So, being realistic, getting things down to a commonness, to an expectation that's more practical, comes into mind. Let me share some things to the women. I am a male teaching, and sometimes these things come up. Remember why he fell in love with you in the first place. Now, this is true. If you would reverse it, remember and build on it. Don't stop the courtship just because you've gone before God and others and proclaimed in a marriage ceremony a devotion to each other. Continue to do the things that brought you together in that relationship, in that friendship, that made you want to go in front of people and God to declare this agape for eternity. And be his wife, not his child. And don't be his mother. It's amazing how often that comes up. Learn to handle difficulties like an adult, and that's applied to both. Be a helper, not a burden in the relationship. That applies to both. He'll worship the ground you walk on if you're a trooper when the going gets rough. That's true with both. And by the way, no man wants to go to bed with his mother. And I say that just to simply say, don't be your husband's mother, wife. And husbands, don't be your wife's father either. The principle's the same. Build the other up. No one on earth can build that spouse up higher than you can. And by the same token, it's amazing how little can be said or done or not done to tear that relationship down. Say that which is appropriate at the right time, with the right tone of voice, with the right goal in mind, and practice that over and over and over in your mind to where it becomes natural. And those of us who might be a little bit ADHD, we act before we think. We have to backstep and apologize from time to time because we've said something we really didn't intend. Sometimes on television there'll be a group of people there and someone will say something totally it's totally inappropriate. And in the movie, to make a point, they will then write this in. I appreciate what the writers do. And that person realizing, did I just say that out loud? We need to think that way perhaps from time to time. Did I really say that out loud? And of course we've been thinking it, but sometimes self-control would have us not say it out loud. But it's a principle with practice that we can be better in. If there's some way that you want that spouse to change or to develop, encourage them in that direction. Don't try to push them. You certainly can't demand it. Be very considerate of the other's feelings as we bring our imperfections into the situation. Another that I don't have it come up that often in talking to individuals, but others tell me it should be on the list. Live within your means. Don't be quick to spend money you don't have. Pay cash as much as possible, or pay off the credit card at the end of each month as much as possible. And that's just teaching us to be mindful of money. And that involves both. Sometimes men will just hedge and hee-haw and be all tight with the money, but then suddenly we come home with a $380 computer. We didn't have money to let her do something fairly small, if you will, but then we're very quick to go out and spend a sizable amount. And women do the same thing. Live within your means. Live within your means. And finally, as it relates to the other person, make your home a castle. I say it differently. Make it the place they can't wait to return to. Parents with teens, make it a place that they can't wait to return to. As they get older, 13, 14, 15, give them more responsibility. Say no less. Let them make some of their own decisions, maybe making some mistakes, but learning in that situation, in that safe environment. Don't let the 15-year-old be controlled in principles of direction the same as the 7-year-old in the house. He's not 7. Let him grow, let him be stretched, let him receive more, if you will, those principles. But with the spouse, let it be a place where they hate to leave and can't wait to come back to. Let that kitchen table be a place of refuge, healing even from time to time. Let it be a place where anything can be said and the person is built up, and this is a place they just don't want to leave. But we have to live there. And we have to live in this world. And we need jobs, and we need all the other things that are there. But the feeling in that home is on purpose. It's deliberate. And it is a special, special place. I cheat, if you will, again today, with the image that's so important in discussions like this. We will never be perfected while we live upon this earth, but we'll be making progress. But the picture of Scripture of God is the picture is the prodigal son who had been willful, sinful. The brother accused him of the worst of actions. But God is at the picture of that road, and the image is he's looked before, he's looked often, and he's waiting, and his arms are outstretched, and he's wanting us to come home. Agape. Yes, we acknowledge sin, and we can't ignore that, and the text isn't suggesting that. But we see a loving Father in that spiritual circumstance. And everything we've said today, though it relates to human flesh and blood, it seeks to aspire toward that which is spiritual, devoted to God, helpful to each other, and certainly makes the church everything special that it ought to be. If we've suggested some things that can be helpful to you, thankful for that. If we suggested some changes that might be necessary, prayerfully you've considered them or you're considering them. If things have been brought up that need to be acknowledged in some way, we stand in a moment to sing a song to encourage you to ask for those things from us. Let us come together and be prayerful on your behalf. If you're not a member of the body of Christ, what is it you need to do? As it speaks to repentance and confession and a burial in water and those things beginning at that point that never end. We're always repenting of sins as Christians. We're always willing to confess His name before men as Christians. We're always dying to self as Christians day by day. We have the Spirit of God dwelling within us there and forever. We deal with guilty complexes then and forever as the guilt is removed. We are drawn together in this corporate body to be the people of God. If we can say or do anything on their behalf, make that known while we stand and sing.
Would you live for Jesus and be always pure and good? Would you walk with Him within the narrow road? Would you have Him bear your burden, carry all your load? Let Him have His way with thee. His power can make you what you ought to be. His blood can cleanse your heart and make you free. His love can fill your soul and you will see 'twas best for Him to have His way with thee. Would you have Him make you free and follow at His call?